Urologist, if you skip masturbation in old age, this will happen to you. Shi Heng Yi. Urologist, if you skip masturbation in old age, this will happen to you. Stopping feels harmless, but it slowly builds pressure in your body, blocks energy, and stiffens the prostate. It's about more than pleasure. It's about circulation, clarity, and healing. The final insight flips everything. Stay to the end. Your body already knows this. Flow prevents stagnation. We embark on this contemplation by considering a fundamental principle of all living systems, a truth as applicable to the vast rivers of the earth as it is to the subtle energetic pathways within our own human form. Movement or flow is essential for life, health, and vitality, while prolonged stagnation, conversely, often becomes a precursor to imbalance, decay, and a diminishment of vibrancy. When we consider the intimate energies of the body, the very life force that animates us, it is crucial to understand that these energies are not designed to become entirely dormant or to be completely suppressed indefinitely without consequence, particularly as we transition through the various seasons of life, including our elder years. The human organism, in its profound innate wisdom, is a dynamic system, constantly seeking equilibrium, constantly engaged in processes of generation, circulation, and subtle transformation. To abruptly or fearfully halt a natural, albeit perhaps moderated expression of this intrinsic energetic current, especially if this cessation is based on misunderstanding, societal conditioning, or an unexamined fear of depletion, can inadvertently lead to a different kind of energetic challenge, that of stagnation. Imagine a clear, flowing stream. Its waters are fresh, oxygenated, and full of life. Now picture that same stream if its flow is suddenly dammed completely. The water becomes still, then murky, and eventually life within it may struggle to thrive. Similarly, the subtle energies within us, including those connected to our generative capacity, benefit from a degree of mindful, conscious circulation and expression. This does not necessarily imply a need for the same frequency or intensity of expression as in younger years, for the body's rhythms naturally evolve. However, a complete and prolonged cessation, particularly if it feels forced or unnatural to the individual's constitution and inner sense, can lead to a kind of internal energetic congestion. This stagnation might manifest in subtle ways initially, perhaps a feeling of heaviness, a subtle dampening of one's overall zest for life, a feeling of being stuck, not just physically, but also emotionally or creatively. Over time, such energetic blockages, according to many ancient healing traditions, can contribute to a wider range of imbalances, potentially affecting not just the specific systems involved, but also influencing mood, mental clarity, and overall systemic harmony. The wisdom that many wish they had understood sooner is that the body often continues to produce and circulate these vital essences, albeit perhaps in different quantities or qualities, throughout life. If there is no healthy, mindful outlet or conscious means of transmuting or integrating this energy, it can, in some individuals, lead to a sense of pressure, discomfort, or a subtle internal agitation. This is not to suggest a prescriptive need for any specific level of activity, for individual needs vary immensely. Rather, it is an invitation to consider that the complete absence of flow, the deliberate and sustained damming of these natural energies, may not be the universally optimal path for everyone seeking sustained well-being in their later years. The key lies in understanding that vitality is often synonymous with movement, both gross and subtle, and that finding a balanced, individually appropriate way to honor the body's continuing energetic nature, even as it transforms with age, is paramount. This involves listening deeply to one's own unique constitution, rather than adhering rigidly to external notions of what is supposed to happen or not happen in old age. The goal is a harmonious internal environment, free from both excessive depletion and undue stagnation, allowing the river of life within to continue its gentle, life-sustaining course. Mind shapes stillness. Let us now turn our attention to the profound influence of our mental and emotional landscape on how we experience any state of being, including periods of relative stillness or reduced physical expression in our intimate lives, particularly as we age. It is one thing to consciously choose a path of moderation or even significant quietude in this sphere, guided by inner wisdom, personal inclination, or a deep spiritual calling that seeks to transmute these energies for other purposes. It is quite another to arrive at a state of cessation or significant reduction driven primarily by fear, by shame, by a sense of resignation to perceived decline, or by deeply ingrained societal narratives that equate aging with an inevitable loss of all vital expression. The state of mind accompanying such a shift, or lack thereof, is not merely a passive backdrop. It actively shapes the physiological and energetic consequences within the body. If the skipping or significant reduction of this personal act in later life is accompanied by a mind that is filled with regret for past patterns, anxiety about present capabilities, or a mournful sense of loss regarding youth and vitality, then this mental state itself can become a source of stress and energetic disharmony. The body, exquisitely attuned to our thoughts and emotions, may register these negative mental patterns as a form of internal conflict or distress. This, in turn, can influence hormonal balance, nervous system regulation, and even the subtle energetic currents, potentially contributing to feelings of low mood, irritability, or a diminished sense of self-worth that is mistakenly attributed solely to the absence of the act itself, rather than to the accompanying mental and emotional suffering. Conversely, if a period of reduced or absent intimate expression is embraced with a mind that is calm, accepting, and perhaps even consciously redirecting that conserved energy towards other creative, contemplative, or compassionate pursuits, the experience can be entirely different. It can become a source of profound inner peace, clarity, and an enhanced sense of spiritual connection or creative focus. The secret lies not just in the physical act or its absence, but in the quality of consciousness that we bring to our choices and our experiences. If an individual in their later years finds themselves skipping this act, not from a place of joyful conscious choice, but from a sense of obligation, fear of harm based on incomplete information, or a passive acceptance of decline, the underlying emotional state can be one of subtle deprivation or unacknowledged longing. This internal environment, characterized by unfulfilled desire or a sense of lacking, can be more detrimental to overall well-being than a mindful, balanced expression might have been. The body does not easily distinguish between a skipped act due to wisdom and one skipped due to fear or resignation if the underlying emotional tone is negative. The regret that some may feel in such circumstances is not necessarily for the absence of the act itself, but for the absence of a conscious, empowered relationship with their own changing bodies and energies. They may wish they had understood that the mind holds the power to frame their experience, to find peace and contentment regardless of the level of physical expression, or conversely, to create suffering around its absence if the mind is untrained or filled with negativity. Therefore, if one chooses a path of greater stillness in this domain, it is paramount that this choice is accompanied by a cultivated state of mental peace, acceptance, and perhaps a conscious redirection of that potent life force. Without this mindful inner work, simply skipping the act, especially if it goes against a natural, albeit perhaps gentle inclination, could lead to a sense of frustration, emotional imbalance, or a subtle energetic stagnation that is then compounded by negative mental states, creating a cycle of diminished well-being. The wisdom lies in aligning our physical practices with a clear, serene, and accepting mind. Health beyond mechanics. It is a common tendency in modern thought to view health, particularly in relation to specific bodily functions, through an almost exclusively mechanical or biochemical lens. We often focus on organ systems, hormonal levels, and cellular processes as if they operate in isolation, governed by purely physical laws. However, a more holistic and ancient understanding of well-being recognizes that the human being is an integrated whole, where physical, energetic, mental, and emotional aspects are inextricably intertwined. When considering the potential consequences of significantly altering or ceasing long-held patterns of intimate self-expression in later life, it is important to look beyond just the immediate mechanics of the reproductive or urogenital system. The regular, mindful engagement with these energies, even in a moderated form, can have subtle but far-reaching influences on overall systemic health. For instance, the process involves a complex interplay of the nervous system, the endocrine system, and the circulatory system. A complete and prolonged cessation, particularly if it represents a stark departure from a lifelong pattern and is not accompanied by other practices that promote similar systemic benefits, could, for some individuals, contribute to a subtle decline in the harmonious functioning of these interconnected systems. Consider the prostate gland in men, a common focus in urology. While excessive or unhealthy patterns of expression can certainly pose their own problems, some perspectives suggest that a complete lack of any flushing or movement in this area over very extended periods might, for certain individuals, contribute to a different kind of stagnation or congestion, potentially increasing susceptibility to certain issues. This is not to create fear, but to invite a broader perspective that acknowledges the body's need for balanced function. Furthermore, the release of certain endorphins and other neurochemicals associated with these experiences can have positive effects on mood, stress reduction, and even pain perception. If this natural avenue for such releases is entirely closed off and not consciously replaced by other mood-enhancing and stress-reducing practices like meditation, gentle exercise, deep connection with nature or loved ones, there might be a subtle but noticeable impact on one's overall emotional resilience and sense of well-being. The key is not to prescribe a universal need for the act itself, but to recognize that it can be one part of a larger ecosystem of practices that support holistic health. If it is removed, particularly if it was a significant part of an individual's life, it's worth considering what, if anything, is taking its place to support those broader systemic benefits. The body is a creature of rhythm and flow. When a significant rhythm is altered or stopped, the entire system may need to recalibrate. If this recalibration is not supported consciously, for example, by ensuring continued pelvic floor health through other means or by cultivating other avenues for stress release and joyful expression, then skipping this act might inadvertently contribute to a subtle decline in areas of health that seem, on the surface, unrelated. The wisdom lies in understanding that our intimate expressions are not isolated events, but are woven into the fabric of our overall physiological and energetic health. A conscious approach to aging involves understanding these interconnections and making informed choices that support the whole being, not just focusing on one isolated aspect in a vacuum of understanding, ensuring that the body's various systems continue to communicate and function harmoniously. Connection deepens life. Beyond the purely physical or overtly physiological considerations, we must also acknowledge the profound human need for connection. Connection with ourselves, with our own bodies, and with the life force that animates us. For many individuals, throughout their lives, intimate self-expression has served not merely as a physical release, but also as a private space for self-exploration, self-soothing, and a tactile affirmation of their own aliveness. To completely skip this in later life, especially if this decision is not born from a place of deeper spiritual fulfillment or conscious transmutation of energy, but rather from a sense of decline, shame, or lack of opportunity, can lead to a subtle but significant form of disconnection. This isn't necessarily about connection with another person, though that is, of course, a vital aspect of human experience for many. Here, we are also speaking of the connection with one's own embodied self. The act of mindful touch, even self-touch, can be a way of staying present with our physical form, acknowledging its needs, its changes, and its continued capacity for sensation and pleasure, however subtle or transformed by age. When this avenue of self-connection is entirely closed off, there can be an accompanying emotional or psychological impact. It might manifest as a feeling of being somewhat estranged from one's own body, a sense of it being other, or merely a vessel in decline, rather than an integral, living part of one's being. This can subtly erode self-esteem and body image, particularly in a culture that often glorifies youth and narrowly defines vitality. Furthermore, our generative energies are intrinsically linked to our creativity, our passion for life, and our overall zest. While these energies can undoubtedly be channeled and expressed in myriad ways beyond direct intimate acts, through art, through service, through deep contemplation, through connection with nature, for some, a complete cessation of any direct acknowledgement or gentle expression of this fundamental energy in its more primal form can lead to a dampening of that creative spark, a subtle flattening of the emotional landscape. It's as if a certain channel of communication with a deep part of oneself has been allowed to go silent. The wisdom here is not to suggest that everyone must continue specific acts indefinitely, but to recognize that the underlying need for self-connection, for acknowledging and honoring our vital energies, persists throughout life. If one form of expression wanes or is consciously let go of, it becomes important to cultivate other avenues for this profound self-attunement. Perhaps it is through dedicated practices like Qigong or Tai Chi, which consciously work with life force energy. Perhaps it is through mindful body scans or sensory awareness practices that keep one intimately connected with physical sensations. Without such conscious alternatives, the skipping might lead to a gradual fading of that felt sense of inner aliveness, a subtle withdrawal from the vibrancy of embodied experience. The human spirit thrives on connection, and our relationship with our own body is the most intimate connection we will ever have. Nurturing this connection in ways that feel authentic and appropriate for each stage of life is crucial for a sense of wholeness and continued engagement with the gift of being alive. To neglect this aspect is to risk a quiet loneliness, not of an empty room, but of a spirit feeling adrift from its physical anchor. Vitality's gentle current. As we draw these reflections towards a synthesis, it becomes clear that the conversation around intimate expression in later life is not a simple binary of to do or not to do. Rather, it is about understanding the body as a vessel of continuously flowing, albeit ever-transforming, vital energy. The concept of skipping such expression, particularly if it implies a complete and indefinite cessation driven by external narratives of decline rather than by deep inner guidance, warrants careful consideration of its potential holistic impact. The ancient wisdom traditions often speak of life force, or qi, as something that must flow smoothly and harmoniously for health and well-being to be maintained. When this flow is unduly obstructed or becomes stagnant in any significant area of our energetic system, imbalances can arise. In the context of our discussion, if the natural, albeit perhaps gentler and less frequent, currents of generative energy that persist even in later life are met with complete non-expression and a lack of conscious engagement or transmutation, this can create a form of subtle internal pressure or stagnation. This is not necessarily about a buildup of physical fluid in a purely mechanical sense, but more about an energetic potential that is neither expressed, circulated, nor consciously refined and redirected. This subtle stagnation over time could contribute to a diminished sense of overall vitality, a certain lack of sparkle or zest that is often associated with freely flowing life energy. It might manifest as a reduced resilience to stress, a slower recovery from minor ailments, or a general feeling of being less robust than one might otherwise be. The body, in its wisdom, seeks to utilize all its resources. If a significant energetic resource is consistently ignored or dammed up without a conscious alternative pathway for its constructive use, such as dedicated spiritual practices, creative endeavors that truly absorb and transmute that fire, or profound service, it may, in a sense, begin to stagnate or even subtly atrophy in its potential. The consequence of skipping this, therefore, is not necessarily a dramatic or immediate urological catastrophe for everyone, but potentially a more gradual, subtle erosion of that vibrant, flowing quality that characterizes true health. It's about maintaining a certain suppleness in our energetic pathways, a continued dialogue with all aspects of our being. The later years can be a time of profound wisdom, integration, and a different kind of blossoming, but this is often supported by a continued, albeit perhaps refined and more internally focused, engagement with our core life energies. To completely shut down a significant aspect of this energetic system without understanding its broader role in maintaining overall vitality might be to unknowingly invite a subtle dimming of our inner light, a reduction in the very current that sustains our aliveness. The invitation then is to approach aging not as a process of systematic shutdown, but as a transformation of how our energies are expressed and utilized, ensuring that the gentle current of vitality continues to flow, nourishing all aspects of our being, keeping our inner wellsprings clear and life-giving. The journey through our later years is not intended to be a gradual fading into oblivion, but rather a deepening into a different quality of light, a unique expression of the wisdom gathered over a lifetime. Our physical bodies, even as they change, remain sacred vessels for this life force, and understanding how to honor their continuing needs, including the subtle currents of our innate energies, is a profound act of self-stewardship. It is not about clinging to youth, nor is it about succumbing to a narrative of inevitable decline. It is about listening deeply with compassion and awareness to the whispers of our own being, and finding the path of balance that allows our vitality to flow in its own way for all of our days. May you approach these transitions with an open mind, a courageous heart, and a willingness to embrace the fullness of your being in every season of your precious life. Fascinating perspective. The idea of flow prevents stagnation really challenges the common narrative that everything just shuts down with age. It makes me think about vitality in a much more dynamic way. Has anyone here consciously worked on maintaining or redirecting this energy in their later years? And what practices or mindset shifts have you found most supportive for overall well-being, not just urologically, but in terms of general zest for life?